I am so excited to welcome you not only to Jacksonville, but to the launching of the podcast called The Covenant, more specifically, the Sister Covenant. And yes, I did say sister. What is the covenant, the Sister Covenant? It is a circle of friends, my friends for 20, 30, 40 plus years, your friends, all of our friends, coming together in a safe space at a time such as this. We as women of color, we are counted on to nurture our families, our children, our significant others, our spouses, our community, our corporate boardrooms, and everything in between. But who fills our cup? I think about flying, and when we get ready to take off, what is said to us first? Put your oxygen mask on first before you can assist others. And that exactly is what the Sister Covenant is all about. A safe space to encourage, to listen, to cry a little, laugh a lot, but most important, to empower and to fill our cup. Morning. Great Sunday morning, and welcome to the Sister Covenant. Yes, your eyes are not fooling you. I am a bit sparkly this morning for good reason. We are celebrating. We are celebrating this moment in our history as we prepare for this week in the inauguration of the first woman of color, a Black woman, Kamala Harris, as our Vice President of all of these United States, and President-elect Joe Biden. So welcome, and we have an amazing show for you this morning. But before we get to that, want to just thank you again for all of your support. This is podcast 7, and we are in the new year, and there is lots of hope and there is lots of reason to celebrate and be hopeful for a brighter day. And we're going to talk about that around our important topic of COVID-19 and the vaccine. But before we get to that, we want to talk about the apparel, the Sister Covenant apparel. And those of you who pre-ordered back in December, you should get your shipment this week. So we thank you. We thank you. We thank you. Last podcast, you saw that we had 2 big checks that we presented to the Sister Accord for $500 and NAMI for $500. For the month of January, we are supporting the Sister Accord, which, as you well know, is an organization that is transforming lives, especially in the lives of women and young girls, and teaching them to love themselves. So if you've not gotten your Sister apparel, please visit our website and order yours today. You see how beautiful it is. I can't wait to get mine this week. And for every $100 or over, $10 will go directly to the Sister Accord. I have the pleasure this morning of introducing a phenomenal woman, Linda Dorman. Linda Dorman is the co-owner and CEO of Orange Wall Enterprises and the founder and CEO of Norman Group Holdings. You will find her full bio on our website. So we have lots of questions for Linda. So, Linda, good morning.
Good morning, Pat, and to all the sisters in the covenant. Good morning. So,
Thank you so much for coming in this morning on this celebration, this
indeed,
great Sunday celebration. And you're actually in DC this morning.
we're that's exactly right. And you know what? We're going to take all the negative events of the last couple of days and this year, and we're going to repurpose it into something fabulous and amazing because we have in Kamala Harris the embodiment of all of the movement from suffrage all the way up to the 21st of this month. And so that's what we're going to focus in on. And we're just proud of her. And we're proud of all the women who helped her get to where she is. And we're proud of you for going ahead and launching this amazing platform for discussion that's really critical, particularly when we talk about having a safe place. So thank you.
Well, Linda, thank you. I was just blown away when I learned of you and learned that you had founded this organization or this company, Orange Wall, and what it is that it stands for. And I'll read it right here, bringing safety solution to the masses. So please share with us what is Orange Wall and what is the mission and what is it that you've been doing for us over the last 10 months of this pandemic?
Wow, it's been a whirlwind. My partner and I actually founded Orange Wall, kind of stemming out of my company, Dorman Group Holdings, where coming from a healthcare background, saw the immediate need as it relates to responding to COVID-19 issues within the healthcare sector. That meaning the supply chain, making sure that there was a procurement stream, compliance, strategies for closing, opening, you name it. It was the wild, wild west back in February. And from that body of work and need, I was very fortunate to bring on a partner, and we founded Orange Wall Enterprises to do just that, bring safety solutions to the masses. And three key areas. First, it started with strategy, how to help particularly the small nonprofits to access the kind of um, tools and services and equipment they were going to need, clearly in response to a variety of things, workforce going home, so therefore applications in remote learning and working, PPE, particularly as they were still holding open the doors of their clinics or their services that they had to deliver to their constituents. And then we moved into later on in May, very shortly thereafter, a technology that has really been our headlining product, if you will, called the Orange Thermal Control. We love all things orange. You should know that. We see that as a fresh, bright, inspiring color. So we named our company that. And it does have its own history in that name. But we also branded Orange Wall, Orange Thermal Control, which is a contact free entryway a temperature reading station that is a little different from the things that have been on the marketplace. And we're very proud of that product and working with our factory to bring it to the marketplace.
So, Linda, you recognize the need to get this out to the masses. So, talk to us about that. It's in the Washington, Maryland, Virginia area. When I go into my company, which I've only gone in there a handful of times over the last 9.5 months, someone puts a thermometer to my head, a person. Or if I go into one of the governmental facilities here in Jacksonville, Florida, the same happens. Tell us what your product does, and is it just in the DMV, the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia area?
Well, part of my background, so there's an understanding how I moved into this entrepreneurial stream. I actually come from the healthcare and social services background. And so working with NAMI, one of the beneficiaries of the product donation, as well as various organizations across the country through my work at BET Foundation, We focused on women's health, and that parlayed into me coming into a healthcare system in the greater Washington area, one of the largest ones, the University of Maryland Medical System. It was through my colleagues within that healthcare system that enlightened me to the fact that we really needed to have a better response than the handheld thermometer readers, which were designed for home use or use in a different type of a setting versus a more traffic or people flow environment. So we understood the intersection of liability, compliance, and needing to collect the data so that businesses could open and people could be considered safe entrance. We decided to take the technology of artificial intelligence, or as we commonly term it, machine learning, and apply that with a robotic technology to create a data driven, software driven tool that would not only capture your data, replacing your temperature, rather, replacing the high liability of someone who is standing there, a screener, a temperature screener, into a technology environment, a standalone kiosk, if you will, that would not only take your temperature with an accuracy of zero point 0.2 Fahrenheit, zero point 0.3 Celsius, but would even more importantly than that, or as importantly, capture the data so that our businesses, our churches, our academic environments, our governmental services, and anyone could in fact have that data to make very viable decisions on how they drive their policies and procedures for entry and for treatment support for those who register with a high temperature. It collects the data and it allows for some very critical data informed policy driven activities. We market across the country. So we're able to ship right from the DMV, from the factory outside of Pennsylvania, outside of, Philadelphia. And it's an easy setup, or our technicians will fly if it's a large installation to support that deployment. So we are national in scope.
So, Linda, tell us about your journey as an entrepreneur. You didn't wake up like this. So tell us, how did you get here? And I'm even wanting you to tell the audience what happened during those critical first week, 48 hours to get you to see the importance or the perceived what was coming down the road. So walk us through that.
Well, as we all learned back in December 2019, and then we spilled over into the new year 2020, hearing the chatter on the news regarding something coming out of China or that we just did not understand and could not grasp. But those of us who were in the healthcare system may have heard a little bit more ramp up and started to have our time and attention and focus. My colleagues certainly helped me to spotlight that, but I had a immediate incident, hosted a women's event in my home for one of my top pharmacists here in our DMV area. But the night before, we had actually honored her in her work in the cardiovascular work. The executive director of that organization's brother lived in New York and had caught COVID, but we did not have a full name or breadth of understanding. That incident shook us to our core because from that February 28th to that March 1st, so just that weekend, he went from being remarkably ill to passing. And in between that time, I had hosted a very large group of women in my home, and none of us had on masks. We all just, used hand sanitizers to get our clothes. We were in very close contact, so no social distancing. We did not apply the things that we know now. So that immediately took me into the research as to what is really happening and how to take my business as an entrepreneur and move from the compliance, supply chain management, international trade, which was the hallmark of what Dorman Group Holdings was doing at that time, to literally how can we be responsive to the COVID-19 and support our local healthcare system that spilled into our, the ecumenical centers, the school centers, our Department of Corrections, and many of our government installations here in this area as well as outside of this area.
So, Linda, the Sister Covenant is all about empowering women, in particular, women of color. You talked to me about your two daughters. Tell me how they played into this business model that you've set up.
I can only tell you that I'm a proud mama of future entrepreneurs or whatever they want to do in life, because they are my sheroes. They took COVID and being isolated inside and decided to really maximize their time. Of course, with some assistance and help. But my oldest, who's only 15 years old, is in pre-engineering in her high school, is one of our lead technicians. She absolutely was able to think through how to actually put our equipment together and the software that drives it, how to stage it for our clients. So we were very gracious to have her on and to train adults in how to do this. So now we have a staff trained by a 15-year-old, and she now has her own business, but she has been focusing in on all things real estate. So she manages some of our personal real estate that we have, and is that key person that our tenants contact if they have a need. My youngest, who's like the your young wonderful intern, yeah, Jocelyn, looks to study marketing and communications, and has been our go-to at 14 years old to develop all of our marketing material, our videos, being able to help us with our website, because she just came to the planet Earth with that kind of technology already built into her mindset. And so we have harnessed it and used it, and she has been a really amazing person to get all of our Zooms technology. She is the Justin for our company at 14 years old.
So, how did you know? Who inspired you at a young age? Tell us about your journey as an entrepreneur, Linda.
I had many, many women who inspired me, from Dr. Dorothy Irene Height, who was one of my recommendations into Delta Sigma Theta sorority, to just Linda Bates Parker, who started the first Executive Women's Circle that has now circled out to other organizations, to clearly the influence of my mother, who actually served under the Carter administration as the deputy assistant or director for the women business department or agency at Small Business Administration. So she was there when President Carter signed into law the protections for women in business as a protected class, that gave us the opportunity to have a level playing field. So she was an amazing entrepreneur, along with my father as well. But there are just too many women to absolutely name. There's women even today that still influence me. Tawanda Livingston, as an example, one of the most amazing women in diversity and inclusion that ensures that women really truly have a level playing field. I could just really frankly name just too many to name, but those are some of the ones that I would say are just high influencers.
Linda, we can talk on, but I want you to know how very proud we are at the Sister Covenant at what you're doing and what Orange Wall is doing. How can we help? You have this amazing product, and as I said earlier, here in Florida, I don't see it as much. So, how do we get this out and bring safety to the masses?
We would love to do that, and we offer remarkable discounts because what's important to us is that, in fact, safety. And so there is an area on our website that your listeners and viewers can actually contact us. It's right on the homepage at the very top. If they go to Orange Thermo, THERMO, thermalcontrol.com, that's www.orangethermalcontrol.com. The telephone number, the 1-800 number, is at the bottom, and they can reach us at any point in time. And of course, when you're in technology, you're pretty much a 24-hour operation, because we do have colleagues and collaborators and suppliers that are in Asia. So when we go to sleep, we start to take a nap, and we actually wake back up again, and or on their daytime while they're up and running, and vice versa. So those are the ways that they can certainly reach. They can reach out to me at Linda, and I spell it Lynda, at orangewallenterprises.com. And I'd be happy to provide any information. We also do all of our virtual demonstrations, and we do come on site if, depending on the clientele. So that's a way to help us to expand our business, but while providing a way for businesses to open up and churches to open up safely, schools to open up safely, because you have something very viable at your front entrance that will be a significant tool to not only take your temperature, but to also support all contact tracing initiatives within that organization.
Linda, you are the epitome of turning lemons into lemonade. And certainly the last 10 months has been just paralyzing for many.
Yes.
But this, what you're doing, as you said, bringing safety to the masses, and just to think, two brilliant women are doing just that. So we honor you and we thank you for tapping into the technology that's available and getting it out to the masses. So we're going to talk to you just a little bit more a little later, and you're going to come back and join our toast.
Absolutely.
And certainly I want to toast to our Founders Day as well, and Madam VP-elect's Founders Day. So we'll do that a little later in the show. Okay?
Absolutely, Pat.
Thank you so much for being on the Sister Covenant this morning.
You're very welcome. I look forward to returning in just a little while.
She is amazing, and it's just an example of all the good that brilliant women in our community is doing. So thank you, Linda.
You're very welcome.
I want to now switch gears, and we have a powerhouse panel that has joined us this morning, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Kim Barbell Johnson, Dr. Kelly Tice Wells, our very own Dr. Anita Petway Tyler, and Tanya Grace. Come on in the studio, ladies. Good morning, good morning, good morning, ladies. How's everyone this morning?
Doing well. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, as opposed to me reading your bios, ladies, they will live on our website. But I want to give each of you just the 30 seconds before we get right into the conversation, because this is a heavy one, and we want to spend every moment talking about this important topic around COVID-19 and the vaccine. But starting with you, Kelly, tell us who Kelly Tice Wells is and what you bring to this conversation.
Thank you, Pat. I am so glad to have the chance to spend some time with you and the ladies of the Sister Covenant today. The best way that I can describe myself is I am the daughter of a nurse who was a first-generation college student and a enlisted Navy man. I'm the granddaughter of someone who worked on the janitorial staff at a hospital for all of her working life. And I sat cross-legged on the floor one day at home and said, to my mom, I want to be just like you, Mom. I want to be a nurse just like you. And she said, no, baby, I want you to be better. I want you to do better than I did. And within days of that conversation, I opened the pages of Ebony magazine and saw a story on Dr. Alexa Kennedy, the first Black female neurosurgeon in the world, who was also a soror, and my life shifted. The inspiration of her work ethic, and her contribution both to her field and to our young women in particular really inspired me. And so from the time I entered medical school, throughout my training as a family practice physician, I was always very conscious of the opportunity to work to end health disparities, number one, and number two, to learn enough about what plagues our communities to be able to express it in a way that folks can understand and then apply it to their lives. So I became very early on interested in health disparities work and cultural competency and care, and knew that the role that I could play as a family doc would be to ensure that the right messaging and the right access to information and care existed for the people that mattered to me most and those for whom I saw that to be such a significant challenge. So my career has taken me through a number of areas and places, including a long stint in public health. But the golden thread that has run through my career has been the focus on and the feeling of a connection to our community, and specifically to the women of our community whose shoulders I stood upon to get here. So delighted, hopefully, today to have the opportunity just to share some usable information for your participants and listeners. And as always, when you're in the company of great women, to take several nuggets home for myself. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kelly. Dr. Kim Barbell Johnson, tell us who she is. You're on mute, Kim. There you are. There you are.
Good morning. I am so delighted to be here, Pat. And like my sister, Dr. Kelly, I have a come up story as well. I will just share briefly that I call Jacksonville, Florida home. Motherhood and being a mom is my superpower. I make a living serving in the Ministry of Medicine. I was trained in family medicine at the Mayo Clinic here in Jacksonville, Florida, and has had a career in academic medicine until about 10 years ago, where I actually ventured into the space of clinical trials and clinical research. I'm happy and delighted to be able to shed some light on this panel this morning, and look forward to answering any questions that the sisters have this morning.
Thank you, Kim. Dr. Anita, you are no stranger to the Sister Covenant. You are our resident medical contributor. But for the purposes of this conversation, I think it's important that our listeners, our viewers, know exactly who you are and what you bring to this conversation.
Absolutely. So first of all, I feel blessed to be a part of the Sister Covenant. Every single week, I take away information that helps me to continue to live, actually. Very happy to see my sister doctors here as well, and look forward to hearing from them. Nice to see Dr. Kim after many, many years, so I'm happy to see her too. But let me just tell you quickly about me. I am a primary care physician, internal medicine specialist. Have been practicing in the South Miami, South Florida area for about 25 years. I may not look like it, but yes, I have for 25 years. And COVID is personal for me. My father-in-law passed away on December 30th from the adverse effects of COVID. So it was personal before with my patients, but now it's definitely personal because it's touched our family. So I'm pleased to be here and can't wait to share information.
Thank you, Anita. And you know we're praying for you and your family. Thank you for sharing that. Tanya Grace, you are also no stranger to the Sister Covenant, as you are our resident spiritual and wellness contributor. But again, tell us why you're in this conversation on this side of the table as a panelist.
Well, I am so excited as well. I have really gained the support from our Sister Covenant, which has really enriched my life so much. As Dr. Kelly mentioned, she has come up standing on the shoulders of her family, who have helped bring and lift her up to where she is today. My life has been a journey, as all of our lives have been. I grew up as a PK, and for those of you who don't know what that is a pastor's kid, preacher's kid. So that experience in and of itself really led to the seeds planted for my spiritual heritage. And one of the things that I told my father at the age of 16, I said, I will never, ever go to another church for the rest of my life. And my dad was old school. He gave us whippings. I don't know if some of the young people know what whippings are, but I got whippings. But instead of a whipping, he laughed, because he knew that life will bring crisis. That's one thing that everyone will go through in their lives. So I had to develop my own spirituality, which was a journey I ran for a long time from my calling. I was a wellness coach for 20 years, where I helped individuals with their fitness and mental, emotional wellness and well-being. And I eventually went to seminary and had the opportunity. I said I didn't want to go to church. I didn't want to work in a church, but had the awesome privilege of entering into ministry in the marketplace, and doors open for hospital chaplaincy. And I am now serving at the Mayo Clinic as their chaplain in a department that's in very critical need. And I am just so honored to be here on the Sister Covenant and to share, contribute the spiritual wisdom that has been given to me during this time.
Thank you, Tanya. So let's get to it, ladies. And I want to start with you, Dr. Kim. There's a lot of skepticism, especially in communities of color. We know our history. We've heard all the conversation around the Tuskegee experiment. We may have had family members that actually were involved in that particular study. We've heard recent conversations around people in the medical community saying this vaccine, be wary of it. Tell us about it. Tell us from your lens why we should get the vaccine for our parents and for our loved ones and for ourselves. Walk us through the journey of how we got here.
So it's a very loaded and, as Anita and others have said, very personal situation, this pandemic, COVID-19. I entered the space as a woman of color, as a physician, as a mom, as a daughter, like many of my colleagues at this table. This is a conversation that's a difficult conversation. Communities of color have been mistreated and have been used and abused throughout history in many ways. And at this time that we are really leaning on science, it's important that those of us who speak science and those of us who are at the table or who understand the language spoken at the table help to translate some of the noise that's really currently in the space. COVID-19, the disease caused by SARS-CoV-2, is here. We've been unfortunately taken the brunt of the disease, populations of color. Blacks are 4 times more likely to be hospitalized with COVID-19, 3 times more likely to die. This is a conversation that's relevant to our community. The things that we have in our toolbox to help to get past this moment that we are, and the moment is critical, are many. And unfortunately, even though CNN, MSNBC, and others have tried to make us all virologists and all physicians, if it was that easy, everyone would be a virologist and a physician. So we know that while there's a lot of noise in the space, a lot of misunderstanding in the space, there's a call for clarity. Why is there a call for clarity? Well, a disease came from Wuhan, China, earlier in this year that basically wreaked havoc on the world. Within record light speed, we had vaccines and therapeutics and testing, things that we had never had before. In that same space, we were forced to recognize some of the social justice issues that we've been facing as people of color. And we've been asking ourselves, why should we trust this? Is this not too fast? And the answers are actually pretty clear to those of us who are at the table. The answers are such that we have a disease that is wreaking havoc, and we need to find ways to protect our people. And one of the ways is the vaccine. And while vaccines may not be for everyone, the vaccines will be for most important for most people to protect themselves from the disease. How did we get to the vaccine? Well, we know that we have 2 vaccines that are currently in the US with more to follow that have been emergency use authorized. The emergency use authorization process is not licensure by the FDA, but it's a new process that we've all heard about that has allowed the FDA to actually bring something to market to help us during this pandemic. The history behind vaccines is a history that we know historically. We've been vaccinating our communities for years. Vaccines have been in bed with the FDA since the 1940s, have been available since the early 19th century. However, we have heard of this new platform, this mRNA platform, and this mRNA platform seemed to just kind of descend from heaven. The truth is, it didn't. mRNA, the platform that is used to develop the 2 vaccines that are currently being utilized, sponsored by Moderna and Pfizer, utilizes a platform of what we call nucleic acid vaccine development. It's new because what we've known about vaccines before has been vaccines that have been developed using either live or parts of the virus in order to help the body to develop a defense should it see that virus again. This platform is a novel platform because it took a while to get here. However, the science that predates this vaccine is at least 3 decades old. In fact, one of the stories that I think gets lost in this translation is the hard work that many people around the table have done. And even the partnerships that existed with influenza and mRNA vaccines with some of these same companies, that story is being lost. So I think what we need to walk away from at least this conversation with is that while this is a new conversation, and we are talking about a new platform, the science is not new. We're talking about a virus that is killing us. We absolutely need to wrap our arms around the fact that we need all the tools in our toolbox to fight this. We need to use this opportunity to protect our families, our elders, our communities, not only in our country, but around the world, because again, this is a pandemic, and we are so not out of the difficult time and space.
Dr. Kim, thank you for that. And I think that's huge that our audience understands, although we're just hearing about COVID-19 back in March, this science isn't new. But what do you say to those critics? And then I'm going to bring Dr. Anita in this conversation because she's on the front line of seeing patients every day. But what do you say to those individuals that say safeguards may have been sacrificed? This is all political. We were just trying to get to November 3rd to get this out here. Now we hear about the fact that we don't have enough rounds of vaccine for the second round. What do you say to those people that say we've skipped steps 1 and 2 and 3 in trials, as well as have we done enough trials on people of color? Talk to us about that.
You know, I'll tell you what I've said to my own parents, and that is, while we know what we know, we don't know everything. But I, as a scientist and as a sister in this conversation, I think that we know enough. And I have received the vaccine. I have encouraged those who are eligible for the vaccine to receive the vaccine, because as a physician scientist, I have watched this process since the beginning, march through the FDA and the regulatory bodies around the world to get to the science. There have been no steps missed in this process. And while accelerated for reasons that I think everyone understands, we were in the middle of a pandemic. This science, again, especially the science that brought these 2 vaccines to the table, and I think it's important to understand that mRNA vaccines are novel, and it required a tweak in one of the base molecules in order to get it stable enough to be used in the space. And the other vaccines that will follow are not necessarily mRNA vaccines, but needed more time because the way that those vaccines are developed in order to meet the regulatory requirements. They're not on the market yet, but they're coming. Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, those that actually have vaccines that are coming to market, they're coming. And the FDA in this country and the other regulatory bodies in other countries are doing the best that we can to kind of balance the risk and the benefit. We need to have the information that we need to work right now. No steps were taken. You have seen as much transparency as you we possibly could see in the regulatory processes. And so while you may not speak the language of research, trust those of us who actually do speak the language, ask those hard questions of us, have us translate that information for you in a way that you can understand it. Because one of the things that I hear most are the questions that you ask. Was it too fast? Should we trust this? My answer is yes, but why is my answer yes? My answer is yes because I speak this language. I'm looking at this every day. And if I didn't trust it for my parents, I would not be recommending it for anyone else. And while, again, I don't know everything. In fact, no one in this space knows everything. The lessons that we are about to learn will be lessons that I hope that we will continue to share in forums such as these. But for right now, for this moment and this time, this is one of the tools that we need in order to decrease the acceleration of the burden of this disease in our communities around the world.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Dr. Anita, you have a private practice in Miami, Florida, in the South Florida area. So I would imagine that's a pretty diverse group, and you have a pretty fair number of individuals of color in your practice. What are you seeing on the front line? How is this vaccine affecting your patients? Have you seen side effects? I'm getting questions like, can my 80-year-old mom that has a heart problem or has suffered from a bout of cancer, can she take this vaccine? How young can my 18-year-old take the vaccine? What are you seeing on the front line?
So absolutely. I'd first like to say amen to Dr. Kim. This is a disease that's killing people of color, causing severe disease in people of color, and then causing long-term side effects in people of color. I've had patients that started off doing fine, got COVID-19, they're now on oxygen. I have people who are fearful, can't breathe. I mean, it's just a horrible disease and people are dying. So I think the numbers are still going up. So one of the things before I get to your question, Pat, if you don't mind, is I want to make sure that those that are listening, if you have any symptoms of a cold or allergies, you're not sure, you can always talk to your healthcare provider, but consider being tested for COVID-19. Let's start there. And let's also remember that we need to continue to do the things that we've been doing. Our social distancing, wearing our masks and wearing them properly, make sure they're above our nose and down to our chin and they fit also in our cheek area, that when we take it off from behind our ears, and we wash our hands after we take off our mask. And if we consider reusing it, that we put it inside of a bag so that it won't contaminate any other areas or any other people. So that's the first thing. And then for prevention as well, the vaccination is extremely important to be considered in all people. Now, because most of my practice is composed of people of color, I've had patients that have questions, even people in the healthcare field who said, I'm not sure I'm going to take this vaccine and my family's not going to do it either. Can you help me? And just from what Dr. Kim was saying, it's important to realize that there are experts who are independent of the pharmaceutical drug companies and the FDA as well, who actually review the data. In order for something to come to a place of emergency use authorization, data has to be reviewed by experts in their fields who actually will look at the data and say, yes, there is safety. Yes, this is efficacious or effective in over 90% of people. So really important to know those things. When you asked about patients with 16 years and older, yes, you can start with one of the vaccinations. The other thing too is to keep in mind that there's an organization, the ACIP, who has designated who will be distributed and allocated to get the vaccination first. So you have the 1A, the 1B, 1C, if you've heard that on the news outlets. Those are people who you start off with the healthcare workers, the older patients, and then you move down all the way by age, and then to people with chronic conditions as well. So there are recommendations for how it should be distributed, and the state and the local municipalities decide how to distribute it based on those recommendations. Our state of Florida, Governor DeSantis has given an executive order on how we are to distribute it by age and also occupation as well. Long-term care facilities are in the 1A, that first category. You've probably heard that on the news as well. Back to your question, and I'm sorry, I'm just so passionate about this we got to remember we are dying from this. So we got to take care. Prevention. So doing those things we already know, and then also vaccinating. So for people with cancer, it's really important to know that in the studies, the initial clinical trials, there were certain populations that were excluded. So people with treatment for cancer within the previous 6 months were excluded from the trials. So that may cause a little bit of confusion about whether or not these people with cancer should actually receive the vaccination. Some of the specialist oncologists are recommending, yes, if there are no contraindications, you should have a conversation with your oncologist, your treating oncologist, about receiving the vaccination. But remember, there's no definitive data because the patients were not included in the studies. The initial clinical trials, will they be studied later? Yes. But there are certain populations that were excluded, so we don't have data on that. The overall general recommendation, because we believe that it's safe, primarily that it's safe, and also that it's efficacious. And we also know that people with cancer are at an increased risk of severe disease. So because of that, they should talk to their doctors about timing of the actual vaccination. So it may be in between cycles of treatment, that chemotherapy and immunosuppressant drugs. So it may be cycled between that, but it's really important to consider, yes. And then I want to also say one other thing about patients with cancer, that if you've already completed your treatment and you're considered a survivor, you should absolutely consider a vaccination, not unless you have contraindications to having the vaccination. So I'll stop there. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into more conversation, but I'll stop there, and hopefully that was helpful.
Very helpful, Dr. Anita. I want to bring Dr. Kelly into this conversation. We've already talked about the mistrust in particular. It's not just relegated to the communities of color, but it is a big conversation. So tell us about the inequities and the disparities as it relates to COVID-19 and what we've seen over the last 10 months. We talked a little bit on the last segment with Linda about her business and how she came to start getting those safety thermal control out to the masses. From your lens, Dr. Kelly, what is this? How do we overcome this hurdle of the disparities? Tell us about the inequities that you see through the work you do.
So thanks. That's a great question. And I think that those of us who have done work related to health disparities were not surprised that there was a problem when there is a disease, an illness that impacts those who have chronic illness at a more intense, in a more severe manner than those who do not. I think we are not surprised then that minorities, particularly Black Americans, are impacted at such a significantly high level. And what I've begun to say to folks is what we know about COVID and its severity. While we still can't explain all of what we see clinically, we certainly know that the condition in which COVID finds you, it really determines and impacts your course of illness. And in fact, what we are combating across the world, specifically in the United States, is this idea that it's just a mild illness. Why should we worry? And that is because most of that narrative is controlled by the majority. And if you were to ask those who have lost loved ones, 71% of African Americans in this country have lost someone or know someone who has been significantly impacted by COVID. And we've heard it discussed just today. My parents lost a dear friend. My childhood friends lost their mother. So it is different for us. And so we have to really take control of that narrative. When you talk about chronic illness, it is long been known that Blacks and African Americans have disparities where that's concerned, and those things are rooted in structural racism, systemic racism, biased care, unequal access to care, unequal access to the things that are necessary to remain healthy, right? It's not just what happens in the doctor's office. It is very much the type of food you're able to have access to. Can you exercise safely in your neighborhood? Do you have the ability financially to get to your doctor's appointments, fill your prescription medications, put gas in your car, and buy food for your family? Those things, those are the constructs through which health disparities are developed. And when I say disparity, it means that a certain segment of the population suffers an additive burden, an additional burden of disease, and has complications, preventable often complications at a higher rate than another segment of the population. And certainly, as we describe Blacks with diabetes, for instance, higher likelihood of having complications, blood sugars that are out of control, kidney impacts, amputations, those sorts of things. And I'm talking about one chronic illness. We haven't talked about hypertension or heart disease or asthma or any of those other things. So the conversation around disparities, unfortunately, is decades old. And as a system, as a healthcare system, we have not yet achieved what we desire, which is equity. Then comes a pandemic, where you've got a group of people who now are exposed likely at a higher rate because they have jobs that didn't allow them to transition to remote work, that they are in homes in many cases with lots of extended family and increased opportunities for exposure and transmission. We found that a number of people who were initially exposed and infected did not have the ability to obtain the proper things for their homes to prevent spread, so to properly sanitize and access to masks and those sorts of things. Often the work of healthcare is viewed through privilege. And you can, depending on the physician you see or where you seek services, leave the hospital setting with instructions that you are unable to adhere to. And again, that perpetuates these disparities. And Dr. Kim talked about the increased hospitalization rates, and certainly we know about the complications, and many remain to be seen. So, and I urgently began to talk to folks in my circle as this began to unfold and say, listen, what you're doing with your chronic illness at this moment, those things that you were not willing to address, we have to tighten up, because we have to be sure that if you are to come into contact with this, that you are in your best state of health when that occurs, to give you the best opportunity to overcome this illness. That said, what the other things that we have to do, and it was touched on, is we have to remain vigilant. The vaccine is one tool in our toolkit, but we have other things in our power to protect ourselves. And because we are becoming more and more fatigued, we are not remaining vigilant about ensuring that our risk is low. When you hear folks say, stay home, safer at home, shelter at home, there was just so many of us who couldn't do that, and perhaps not enough information directed at our community about how you do that if you still have to go to work. How do I keep myself safe? What do I do when I get home to protect my family members? And so we want to be sure that we're continuing to push that information out as well, because until it's your time to accept this vaccine, you must really be diligent about adhering to the guidance that exists, so that you're safe until time. I think the other really big concern in terms of health disparities is that the long-term implications, right? We're dealing with something, and we focused on the health implications, but the pandemic has injured us from a financial perspective as well. We've got physicians whose practices are suffering because of the pandemic. We've got other businesses and business owners who are suffering. And we've got members of our communities whose livelihoods were threatened, job loss, insurance loss as a result of job loss. So the impact of those financial strains, both on our mental well-being and mental health, as well as our long-term health and continued access to care, those should all be parts of our conversation right now.
You've touched on so many points, Dr. Kelly, but one of our most vulnerable populations is the elderly. And a lot of them have been unable to stay in their homes for a myriad of reasons, for many reasons. Talk a moment about that, especially from the insurance perspective. What are you seeing from your perspective, and how do we help this most vulnerable population with this virus?
It's a critical piece. I can tell you one of the first things that happened that was of concern to me was we shifted to a remote environment, and quickly, in Florida Blue, among many other insurance companies, worked very quickly to ensure folks could get access to care in a virtual setting. The moment folks began to report how quickly we were able to turn on those benefits and allow physicians to get paid to provide that care, I thought of my two 81-year-old parents and the week it took me to try to get my dad to even do a shipped order, much less to download and learn the application for virtual health visits. And then I was a little frustrated that once we'd figured it out, that the clinician that was caring for them didn't offer it initially, right? So there are lots of ways for there to be gaps in things like that. The elder community in particular, being less digitally savvy, being really prone to significant impacts of isolation. We find that in later years, some of the barriers that have long existed related to finances equalize a bit as folks, retirement funds and savings become depleted, and isolation and perhaps even a decline in their mental agility contribute to that isolation in a way that they are articulating their needs as well as they could or should. It creates a crisis. And what most folks who have cared for parents of advancing age find is the care and service delivery becomes a patchwork. It's a set of services, paid for in part by this, and then in part by commercial insurance if it exists, or by Medicare or Medicaid, and everybody sort of picks up a little piece. Commercial insurance typically only will pay for short-term nursing home type stays. Long-term care has other sources of funding, but none are quite adequate. And so we find ourselves, really working to try to problem solve. You might need assistance in the home. You might need assistance with meal delivery. You might need assistance with, we have a program where it's kind of adopt a grandkid, where we pair teenagers with members of our Medicare population just to teach them how to do things. It used to be, pre-pandemic, the student would go to the home and get high things off of shelves and do things like that, lift and move and really facilitate. It also worked to as a visit, which actually helps the elder population. But when that had to shift to virtual, then that became a source of support for digital learning, how to use apps, how to FaceTime and connect with family members, those kinds of things. But there is not one solution to the long-term care issue and the exorbitant costs that folks incur trying to ensure that their loved ones are provided care. And the conversation to solve it has to be collaborative. It has to include all of the payers that I named, but also a lot of the facilities and community organizations that contribute. I think that should be a global conversation, because it is far from holistic. And often we find that if we are not asking the right question, that there are gaps in those services. And as folks continue to age, their home environment, be it a long-term care facility or if they're able to stay in a home with a caregiver, becomes more and more unsafe in terms of physical issues, but also most importantly because of its isolated nature. So you raise a very important and critical point, and it is the reason certainly that we saw a great deal of illness and impact in our long-term care facilities, so in our nursing homes right out of the gate with COVID. It is the reason we had a similar conversation with hurricane impacts in years past. I think all of us are aware of some of the challenges that have existed there. That needs a reboot and a review in order to ensure that our folks have the right access to care. How a community cares for its most aged and its infants is a measure of a community's ability to really achieve health equity, and we are not there. We're just not there.
That is critical. That is critical. Thank you for that, Dr. Kelly. Tanya Grace, I want to get your weigh in on this. So had a very eye-opening conversation just a week ago with a dear family member who has 2 forms of cancer and has had a pacemaker for some 19 years, since 50. And I said, so when are you getting the vaccine? What's the plan? And the comment was, I'm a person of faith and I've come through many challenges and I'm just going to pray about this and God will be there to sustain me through. And as we talk, this is a personal decision. In your role, what are you seeing? And is there a complement between the science and our faith? We are strong people of faith in the African American community. What is your take on this position?
Well, specifically within our communities of color, right here alone, you have a panel of experts. And one of the greatest challenges that I have found in this space, navigating as a spiritual leader in healthcare, is fighting against misinformation. There's nothing wrong with faith, but also utilizing wisdom, trusting individuals whom I believe God has given the wisdom, skill, intellect to help solve critical areas of need. And we have to ask for that wisdom as well as discernment. And as you mentioned in your friend's case right now, for example, churches are closed down. Pastors are unable to come inside healthcare facilities. So one of the needs right now is ministering to patients and families during crisis. So as I have a privilege to do that, I find that it is so important to help patients find a comfort and support system to help them cope with their fears and anxieties. Because so many patients come in with fears and anxieties. But one of the things, yes, we can rely on our faith. Yes, use your faith, but continue to include your healthcare, your physician, your healthcare workers. Continue to have conversations and not live in a space of fear and isolation, which is hurting our communities so much more.
Tanya, you work at Mayo, so daily you interact with families. How do you walk them through that grief Anita shared with us that unfortunately she recently lost her father-in-law, and it was not expected. I've had comments in the chat. I know I have a family member that they just lost their 83-year-old uncle to this horrible, horrible disease. What is your perspective from the faith community, but also how are we helping these individuals get through these cycles of grief and come to this peace?
Right. So again, grief is very personal. There's so many, and our hearts hurt when others are hurting as well. So many families have lost loved ones, and that's one level of grief, but there's so many layers because families are unable to be at the bedside of some of their loved ones. So again, that's another level of grief, not being able to be present with your loved one. So research has shown that when people are ill, one of their primary sources of support is their spirituality. So with that, that can look different for different individuals, whether it's we have individuals with a Muslim background, they may choose the Quran. There are others who may rely on scripture. There are those who may rely on prayer or meditation. Each patient's family has to reach for their spirituality as a support. And as a chaplain in a facility that serves patients from all walks of life, it is so important to support individuals when they're facing severe illnesses and serious illnesses, to tap into their spirituality for support. And again, the research has shown that when they tap into their spirituality, there's improved emotional state, their immune system becomes stronger, there's even reduced risk of disease, improved confidence, and stronger support. So having all of these benefits, having those benefits are truly essential when individuals can tap into something like their spirituality to help them through these crises.
Thank you, Tanya. I think what we walk away knowing, there is no magic bullet. There is no one size fits all. So in our last few minutes, we're over time, but I don't apologize for it because this is some powerful information that you ladies are sharing with us this morning. And that's what the Sister Covenant is all about. Trusted space, but also trusted voices coming from people that we trust. So in these last few minutes, I'll open it up. There are a number of questions that have come about that I've gotten as I prepared for this show, and people knew we were talking about this topic. This new strand of the coronavirus has entered our country from the UK. So if I've had the virus before already, can I get this new strand? How does the vaccine affect that? Again, what are the side effects of the vaccine? If I'm a pregnant mom and I'm a nursing mom, should I get the vaccine? There are just many still unclear questions. In our last few minutes, talk to us about what we should be weary of and what we should be hopeful for as we continue this journey.
So from the vaccine space, I'll at least speak to what we know and what we don't know with regard to viral development, vaccines, and the viral changes. Viruses mutate. That's what they do. We've known that, and it's not new. What we've seen in the UK has actually been seen also in the United States and in other countries, actually. And that is that there are parts of this virus that's getting smart. It's what viruses do. It's what we do. We try to adapt when, there's a threat. And what we know is what we know. What we know is what the vaccine studies have said to the FDA, the sponsors of those studies have said to the FDA. And what we know is what we know from the body of science that predated the interim report. So we know quite a bit. And what we think is that we know enough with the technology that's available to at least say at this point that we don't have an imminent threat by the viral changes that we're seeing. We think that based on, particularly with the mRNA, messenger RNA technology, we know that we will probably be able to still do what we intended to do. And it's very specific that we understand what vaccine trials have intended to do. The vaccine trials did not say we're going to prevent you from getting SARS-CoV-2. No trial that we have has actually proven that you're not going to get COVID-19 and the virus that causes COVID-19. The trials were intended to say, to prove that we can decrease the burden of disease, that we can decrease moderate to severe disease and hence death. And that's a very important distinction with the difference that we need to understand because we don't have the science yet to say that what we have in our toolbox will help us to not get SARS-CoV-2, the virus. We can get SARS-CoV-2, the virus, and not have symptoms, as you know, and that was not something that we looked at in the studies or that they looked at in the studies. What we then know and hypothesize regarding the virus is how we've developed our vaccines, how we have made our efforts to address the spike protein and for the body to create its own immune system to fight SARS-CoV-2, the virus, when we see that even with the mutant strains that we see, that we shouldn't actually have more disease and death. But we don't have the data yet. That's playing out right before our eyes, so stay tuned for that. But we don't have the data yet. What is suspected now, or what is being discussed now, is that the viral changes are making this disease more transmittable. That we're seeing more people more likely to get SARS-CoV-2 because of the changes in this virus. What we don't know is if it's impacting the severity and the morbidity and mortality of COVID-19. And that data will be forthcoming because it's playing out in real life right before our eyes. And it's that kind of information, it's that data that we need to actually say what happened. So while you may hear lots of conjecture at the current time, we are still a science, as all of our sisters on this panel has talked about, the science of mental health and neurochemicals, the science of SARS-CoV and immunology, the science that have brought us to the space. The science will actually be the science. And when that science is on the table, it's going to be important that we return to a space such as this, or you return to a group that you trust to understand how does that science impact you? Because all studies are not created equal, all viruses are not created equal. And we need to understand how this data impacts us personally. And I think that's an ongoing conversation, Pat. But again, the fear is understandable, but we must trust the facts so that we can get through and get past the fears.
Kim, well said. Ladies, any last burning comments for our audience?
I'd just like to say that we're our own best advocate, and we advocate for our parents as well, our elderly parents who don't always understand. So I would like to applaud everybody who's listening today and encourage somebody to listen to the podcast later. And like Dr. Kim said, to continue to get information, because the information is going to continue to come forward with COVID-19. So be encouraged. It's going to get better. We just got to hold tight, put on our seatbelts, and just make sure that we continue to preventive care and consider the vaccination. But there's a lot more information that could be shared. So thank you so much for bringing this very important topic, and so grateful for the rest of the panelists, and want to thank them as well.
Thank you all. So at this time, I want to bring back to the panel or to the room, Linda Dorman.
I am
Linda
back.
can join us. Hi, Linda. Thank you so much. Ladies,
Wow.
This has been amazing conversation. This is not a one and done. We will have more ongoing conversation because, as Dr. Kim just said, it's not one size fits all. We can't just speed to solutions. We have to be knowledgeable. But I think what this did this morning was give us a good start. We know that as women, as mothers, as wives, as nurturers, it's our responsibility to ensure that we have the knowledge so that we can share it with our families, with our loved ones, with the families that we care for, with our community. So we have to be knowledgeable first. So I want to provide our contact information. If we have that slide that we can show real quick, if you have any questions for this panel, please contact us at Keepers at the Sister Covenant. Keepers at the Sister Covenant. Go to our website, thesistercovenant.com, and you will see on our website how you can get in contact with us. Send us an email. I promise you, we will respond or we will get the information. On Wellness Wednesday, we will have more information about this important topic. And right after this podcast, for about 5-10 minutes, these ladies will join me and we will talk just a little bit more about COVID-19 and this vaccine or these vaccines that are available right now, the myth, the facts, and the hope, because there is hope. That's what we want you to take away from this conversation, that we are in a new year, we are at a reset, but we still have to empower ourselves and be knowledgeable, vigilant, but yet hopeful for tomorrow. So with that, I want to lift our glass. Ladies, do you have your glasses? Glasses available? We want to toast to the year. We want to toast to this historic time in our country. We've lived through some dark days, most recently, some unfortunate incidents and some horrific times that we are seeing, but we're not going to succumb to those. We are not going to shrink. We're going to celebrate and we're going to thank the God that we serve for the times such as this, but also for bringing us together for a time such as this. So I thank every sister here. I thank every sister in our audience that supports us, and you continue to be those that nurturer of your family and your community. I want to give a special shout out to all of my Divine Nine sisters, the ladies of Alpha Kappa Alpha, the amazing sorors of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, as well as Zeta Phi Beta, who all celebrated Founders Day this past week. And of course, my line sisters, because we celebrate 40 years of service, sisterhood, and social action today. So with that, raise your glasses, ladies. Hope and brilliance. So I say to you all, be bold, be brilliant, be brave, be beautiful, my sisters, because you all are, and be blessed. Cheers.